And we're live. Hey everyone, Marco and Ken here from the Firehouse Project. Excited to have you guys all with us. And yeah, let's get started. We're talking about the path to landing a technical job at an awesome startup.
Yeah, we're both super excited to talk about sort of our experiences working at startups and just the way that we were able to sort of land those jobs. So I'm super excited for the session. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah. So we already have like what, a ton of people coming. Still some joining. So we can get started with introducing ourselves and then actually jump in, giving you a bit of an overview of what we're doing, our background, and then also like, we have a few questions that we want to answer, and hopefully you guys find it helpful. And yeah, let's get started. We're talking about the path to landing a technical job at an awesome startup.
Yeah, we're both.
And we had some technical difficulties. Something played in the background. Here we go. We're back on. All right, cool. All right, where do we want to start? I introduced this guy. This is Ken, senior web developer, really good. Worked for a couple of startups, Agile, Clicks, Where.com. They all got acquired, I think, by PayPal, Where.com. What was that, 150 million or something?
According to TechCrunch, 130, but you can't believe everything you see
always mess this up.
On TechCrunch, right?
So 130 million. The last startup was acquired for that by PayPal, and he was one of the tech leads over at PayPal, really good web developer, really accomplished. But always one thing I'd like to tell you guys before you think too highly of this guy is one thing that he sucks at. And so the last time we went sailing, we were in Boston, right, here on the River Charles, we were sailing, and that guy kept flipping that boat and we got wet. So don't go sailing with this guy.
Okay. So let me interrupt Marco and introduce him. So Marco is not only a kick-ass web developer, but he's also led teams. He's led a UX team. He's done product management. And really successful startups out there, companies like Jana, Peer Transfer. Peer Transfer is this international tuition payment platform that's transferred, I think, $1 billion so far. So they're just absolutely killing it. So Marco's worked for really, really great startups in the past. But before you think too highly of this guy, the thing that you want to be nervous about is if he teaches you any sort of a water sport. Because last time we went stand-up paddleboarding, we actually had to get rescued by the lifeguards. So stay away from us, I guess, if you're going to be going in the water.
Yeah. Either in the Charles or in the ocean. It's not safe with us in the water. It's safe with us coding or building stuff. We're really good at that. But in the water, who knows? All right, so quick background about us, our story, right? We're in coding education, and we had basically too many people come to us and be like, hey, Marco, can you build this web application for us? I have this startup idea, I want to get it built. So we started teaching a lot of people like at universities, like where have we been, like Harvard, right?
Harvard. Babson, Rhode Island School of Design.
Brown, we were there too, right?
We did some high schools too, those were fun.
Oh yeah, in Hawaii, right? We flew out there. That's when we got arrested by the lifeguards. Because they were big waves. But yeah, and so then we went on and like taught those people how to build fully functional web applications, and that was a lot of fun. And we were like, still had people come to us like, hey, but I want to build my own idea, I really want to launch my idea. And so we now started doing 12-week immersive online apprenticeship programs where we actually take people with no coding experience and get them to a point where we treat them as a junior web developer, and they build and launch their own web applications together with their coding mentors that are part of the Firehouse Project. So that's what we're doing right now. And people launch their own startups, but they also get jobs at startups in technical positions. So really proud of that when we have people work at really cool startups.
Yeah, but for this session, I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the techniques that you can use to land a really awesome job at some of the best startups out there. So
let's jump in.
Let's jump into some of the questions.
Yeah, the first one is like, how do I find out which of the startups that are good are actually hiring right now, right? And one of the first questions I always ask is, like, first we need to distinguish, like, where do you want to go? What kind of startup, right? Because there's different ones. There's ones that are like pre-Series A, so they just raised their seed funding, and then there's ones that actually already raised the Series A. And I think between the two, there's a big difference.
So tell me about what is a Series A?
Oh, that's actually really good, right? So if you're a startup, the traditional one, you raise money from investors, and then you use that money to build out your idea, right? You can also what's called bootstrapping it, where you do not need to raise any money, but you make it on your own until you're profitable. So the traditional startup generally raises money. The seed round, which is usually a couple $100,000, those are the startups when they're just starting out. We're talking small teams, maybe 3, 5. I would say less than 10 people, definitely, right? the really small ones.
Yeah, so some of these companies are companies that have gone through these incubators like Techstars or
Exactly.
Y Combinator or something like that, but they haven't raised their millions of dollars yet. They only
Exactly.
have like a small amount.
So that's one thing you need to think about when like, okay, how do I find even a startup? Is like that distinction between pre-Series A and then what Series A, right? That's like, okay, our idea really works. Now let's pour gas on that fire and raise more money, like 2 million, 3, 5, 10, right? Anything there, in the millions usually.
Yeah, and there's reasons that you'd want to go to either side of the equation. So if you go to a company that's before a Series A, something that just is like just getting off the ground, you have a huge impact on like the direction of the company. The flip side is
like number 1, 2, 3, something like that, right?
The flip side is it's a little bit more dangerous because you don't even know if that company is going to be around in like 3 months because there's so many risks associated. After Series A, it's a lot more sort of stable because they have a lot more money in their bank account.
Also, if we're looking at finding a job, right? You're going to look at the Series A startup. Those are startups that really want to grow right now. They need way more people than one that just raised their seed round or came out of an accelerator. So the seed round startup, they're usually looking for 1 or 2 people versus the Series A startup that just raised that money. They probably need like, you know, what do you need? Like 10 people, 20 people, right? They're going to grow immensely. And if there's more positions open, there's a higher chance that you can land one of those positions. But where do you find those startups? You know?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways that you can go about looking at for these different startups. The first part that you want to do is you want to figure out which type of a startup do you want to work for, pre or post Series A. If you're looking for something that's pre-Series A, you can look at these incubators, things like Techstar or Y Combinator, and see what are the companies that are actually going through there. Go to their website.
Or the local accelerators, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have sort of this startup community, just sort of looking at those and going to the websites and seeing, do they have an email address? And the thing about some of these companies is they're moving so fast, they might not even have the jobs posted. So if they just have like a contact form, you can email those guys directly and just say like, hey, can I talk to the CEO? I would love to work for your company. There's like the story of the guy from Foursquare who wanted to do biz dev for Foursquare before it was huge. So he ended up going out and he did a bunch of work just for them. He kept emailing the guy and he's like, hey, can I interview for a job? Can I interview for a job? Can I interview for a job? And the guy just said like, hey, he didn't respond. So then he went out to his local area. He started recruiting people to use it. He grew the user base, and then he emailed the CEO and said, hey, I just did all this stuff for your company. I'd like to get an interview. And believe it or not, he got the job, right?
Exactly.
So that's sort of how you have to go. You want to talk directly to the senior people at these pre-Series A companies, people like the CEO, CTO, stuff like that.
Yeah, and so like one thing I get, if you know, maybe not all the people who are watching us right now actually go like, well, I don't know how to get out there, like I'm doing all this work for free, or they might not have the time. Another thing is like use your network, you know. So like that's one thing like why LinkedIn comes in really powerful, helpful, and is really powerful is because you can actually look who are you connected, who could give you an introduction. I mean that helped me a lot land my first jobs at startups was getting introduction from people that know someone in the leadership role at a startup.
And it's funny, so like I worked at Where.com, and the engineers at that company are all tend to sort of, they're tending to move on to other things. Not all of the engineers, but a lot of them. And you see that they're all going to like the same type of companies. There's like a handful, maybe 4 or 5, that are just really pulling a lot of those people, and it's because of the network, basically.
Yeah.
If you have somebody who trusts you that says, hey, this person is awesome, that's going to go a long way. So the other thing that we should mention is it can be tempting to sort of look at this like reaching out to your network like sort of a Facebook thing. You go on LinkedIn, you say, hey, I'm looking for a job. That's not really going to work out too well. Like maybe it will. It's not
that laser focus.
You want to have the laser focus
exactly.
with your network. You want to say, who is the person who would know about the jobs? You send them a personal email and you say, hey, Marco, I know that you know a lot of startups out there. Can you help connect me to one of the ones that you think is the best fit for me?
Or can you introduce me to person X?
Yeah, that's even better.
And then give me even the copy of what you want me to write to that person. And then I can just copy paste in 2 seconds. I can fire that email out. I helped you. I feel good. You feel good. And the ball is rolling.
Yeah, the other thing is like, don't underestimate who you can ask for help. So it's kind of funny, like a couple of people who have actually been my managers at companies have reached out to me and said, hey, I'm kind of looking for a job, because this was back when I was doing sort of like internships. I internships and they were my boss, and then now they're looking for a new job. And my network now is better than theirs is because they've been in the same position for 10 years. Meanwhile, I've been moving from startup to startup. So don't only think who's the most senior person in my network. Think about who knows the most people in the community that I want to be in.
Yeah, it can be helpful to me. And one of the things we usually do in our apprenticeship, right, we open up our networks to all of our students so they can have access to all the people, and we do introductions if they're looking for jobs. Because that is a lot of like somebody vouching for you and saying like, hey, you should get together and talk to that person. Well, that's the network. I think it's really important. But there's other ways you can start. Like, you know, tonight, if you don't know someone, you first got to find the startups maybe. And that's also like you can use the search engines out there. So angel.co, right? That's a big one. That's where all the startups advertising their jobs. And we share all these links with you in an email afterwards, but you can look at it, angel.co. That's the one. Also Indeed.com, which is one of the big search engines.
Indeed is a huge like aggregator, so it pulls sort of all these job listings from startups, big companies that do sort of like regardless of what you're looking to do. So,
but if you add the word startup into the search query, then you usually get only startups because the startup puts that in their job description.
Whether you're looking to like work for any of these companies or if you want to do it the network way, go into like Indeed.com and seeing what type of positions are open. Like, what are the like requirements? That will give you a good idea to maybe these like really there's two different types of jobs. There's jobs that are advertised and there's jobs that really aren't advertised and sort of your network will help you fill. So basically, if you go through the job boards, you can have a better sense of what's going to be expected of me in a role, say like a junior web developer or something like that.
Yeah, so you get an understanding of what kind of qualifications. So that's always good to prepare yourself when you have conversations to actually know what's the bottom line, what are they looking for. I'd say like another thing is like also you can go and you can use like blogs like TechCrunch and look who recently raised a Series A. And see those articles, read about the startup, get to know what they're doing, and then you actually can go to their homepage and contact them. That's another good one to finding those startups that are hiring right now because they raised a lot of money. Another thing is you can go on Twitter and you can follow actually the people who invest into startups, right? Can give you guys a few of those. So you have like Fred Wilson, he's a VC over in New York City. Then there's Chris Sacca, he's the guy who invests in what's that, Twitter, Instagram, Kickstarter, really successful guy. He's probably pointing out really, really good startups out there that he invests in, and those are the ones that competition might be hard to get a job, but those are really good ones. And there's also Jeff Busgang, a really good VC that I know personally over here in Boston. So he tweets about Series A startups as well, and that's another thing you can do. Follow those people, look what they do. And then also, like, what else do we have? We have the demo days, right? That's another thing.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
So if Techstars has a demo day, just go there. You can actually meet the founders in person and just talk to them. And founders always know other founders, right? In our network, we all talk. Like, all the founders, they know each other, and they can refer you to somebody else as well.
And if you build a relationship with these people, it'll give you a huge, huge advantage. These guys get, so when I was working at Where.com, we were hiring, and I was like part of that process. The pile of like resumes that we would get from this, it's inches thick, right? So we don't even like read the entire thing. We skim them really quickly and just kind of like filter out as many as we can for as fast as we can. We want to reject every resume that we have, and we only end up with maybe like 10, but then we sort of go nitpicky.
And that's why you want to have that relationship.
You have the relationship.
Personal.
You don't have to worry about the filtering out sort of right away. You get to the top of that list,
and you get
at least a chance to get in the door.
And then another thing is like, there's also a lot of networking events. If you can't, the demo days are oftentimes like spaced out a lot. So you can go to like the tech networking events, right? In Boston, we have plenty every single week. And there's big ones where there's startups actually having demo tables. So you can talk to them there. They're pitching live in front of a couple hundred people. You can try getting an introduction, get a business card, get that personal email from one of the founders and follow up and see if you can get on the phone with them for a couple of minutes. And tell them what you're up to and what you'd like to do and how you could help them.
Yeah. But you want to be careful with these networking events. It's easy to sort of just go to them, sit, watch the pitch, and then leave after maybe having one of the free beers or something. You don't get any value from that. What you get value for is like the uncomfortable part of that, which is going up to the people that sort of you think are going to have the connections, which means they're actually a little bit intimidating to go up to. So you have to put yourself in a little bit of an uncomfortable situation if you're going to go through these like events, but it's also an easy way to quickly build a relationship that can sort of help you out.
And also learn what doesn't work.
Exactly.
Every time you're outside your comfort zone, you're by default learning more than if you stay inside your comfort zone. So yeah, don't be shy. Go to people and talk. People always like to talk to other people, so that usually works really well. I also, let's see, there's some question popping in, so let's make sure that we get all of them. I think maybe go get to the questions in a little bit. Another thing is like, how did I find my jobs, right? So the one at Pure Transfer where we build an international tuition payment platform that transfers about close to $1 billion every year for international students and saves them a lot of money. That was through an introduction. I found the company and I looked, you know, are they hiring or not? And they actually had a position that I liked. And I did not email them at all. I went through somebody that I know really closely that knows me too and asked, hey, you know one of their VPs of business development that was? Please send me an introduction. And then I actually went there, and this wasn't for an interview. This was just to get to know each other, because I first wanted to know, do I like those people even? Like, can I hang out with them? And we just hung out, and then what actually was like an hour-and-a-half long conversation that morphed into an interview, because all of a sudden I was looking at their data, because I did a lot of data analysis and they wanted to know what I think. And those were kind of interview questions, but they're not, because it was like interesting for both of us on both sides. How did Marco interpret our numbers? And that's how it all led to a job. It was that introduction using my network. What about you?
So I guess there's been a couple different like key roles, key startup jobs that I sort of ended up getting. And the first one was when I had zero experience. So I had I had 2 jobs in my life. I bagged groceries, I guess I stocked shelves there too, and I delivered pizza. That was what I had.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No. You get the next pizza.
It was really a wonderful job delivering pizzas. So I would go back and do it again. But anyway, I had zero like technical experience. So it's like, how am I gonna like find a job? Well, I ended up sending resume after resume after resume to some of these companies that I just found through these various job boards, stuff like that. And I was looking for like a 6-month sort of internship. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people rejected me. I got like a lot of just, not rejected me, but they just didn't follow up, right? You send the email and just nothing, crickets. So small percentage, maybe like 5% got back to me. We booked an interview. I ended up going on a lot of interviews, but I couldn't really land the position that I wanted. And then I ended up talking to one of my mentors, and he basically said, if you look at the jobs that you're applying for, they're like pretty high up there, because I wanted to have a really cool job. I was looking at places like game companies where I could be like a mid-level sort of like game designer and all this.
Have you ever designed any
I
games?
never designed any games or anything, but I was just like, that sounds like a really cool job. I would love that every single day. And I was filtering out sort of all the kind of like boring-ish jobs and the jobs that weren't exactly where I wanted to end up. So basically, he pushed me in the direction of, you're not going to get the perfect job out of the gate, so what you should do is you should try to find a job that will push you in the right direction. So I ended up doing a QA, so I was like testing software. And I didn't really want to do that, but it was getting me in the door. And from there, once I started testing the software, what I found is as an engineer, there's certain tasks that nobody wants to do. And if you find the tasks as a non-technical person, or a technical person but somebody who isn't coding full-time, if you find the tasks that none of the other engineers want to do, they're going to let you do it, right? And then before you know it, you're coding like half the time, and then you move up and you're coding a lot more than that. So that was sort of my first experience. So starting as doing this testing, which I sort of started tapering that down and started coding up the stuff that nobody else wanted to do. And before I knew it, I was like one of the lead guys over there. So that was sort of a way I got my first job. The second job, so that was sort of doing more desktop coding. My first web development job, I had zero experience on the web. And it was just like, how am I going to get this job? I've never gotten a job as a web developer, and desktop applications are a lot different. So I basically went through a bunch of tutorials. I read a few books. I got comfortable enough with the material, so I had that. And I also had friends who were doing it a lot, so we sort of would work together. I built a couple of projects, and then I interviewed for one of the places that I found, and I ended up getting the job. And I learned a ton on the job. So you can't underestimate the amount of stuff that you can learn on the job. And I would say even if you don't think you're ready to be in the position that you want to be, give it a shot, because basically if you go on an interview now and it doesn't go that well, that's fine. It's actually going to teach you a lot. It's going to teach you this is what you need to learn. This is what the interview techniques are. You get the feedback. So even if you know for a fact you don't have the skills to do it, try to get in the door and get the interview anyway. And a lot of people will do a lot of like mock interviews, stuff like that. You can prepare for that stuff and it's really valuable, but nothing really beats actually sort of sitting in the chair and getting asked these questions directly and getting that feedback going.
So, which is a great segue into our next question. Is like, how do I gain the necessary technical skills, right? If I want to join a startup on the tech side, how do I gain that? And I think you mentioned that a little bit. It's like actually building real-world projects and coding and going maybe to a hackathon and coding with a team, right? That's how I learned a lot of coding skills when I went to hackathons, because I worked with different people and they use technology in a different way, or technology that I haven't used before. And then also like build something, build out your portfolio, you know, build like 3-4 web applications that are really good. And then you can, if you're at the interview or even before, you can show people what you've built. So there's now, you can talk about what you've done and not some like theoretical questions. You're still probably going to get those, but there's more substance to it, because it's way more exciting talking about a project, one of your side projects that you're passionate about, rather than actually going like, okay, well, at my last job I did this, at my last job I did this.
Yeah, it's sort of like the difference between when I landed my first job as a web developer versus when I landed my first job as a QA person, right? As a web developer, I said, here's something I built for fun, here's all this stuff. My first job as a QA person, I had to do that because I didn't have any experience. I couldn't just say like, hey, here's a bunch of pizzas I delivered. Like they just don't care, right? So, but if on the flip side, if I ended up building some software, I could probably go right into the role that I wanted if I could actually have the experience.
So demonstrate those relevant skills that they want and try to learn them and show them, right? And we can go into like also the other skill sets that are needed in a startup as well, and see how we can demonstrate them actually that you're good at that stuff, so you have a much better shot of landing the job.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that you can get to get any job is just to be really fired up about what you're doing. People love to be around people who just have this like true passion about what they do every single day. So if you love what you do, in the interview, you're going to communicate that. The way that you talk and the way you light up when somebody asks you a question that you know the answer to, it's going to be so much different than somebody who's just phoning it in.
Yep, definitely. So, you know, the other question that we wanted to go over is like, if I'm not a great like coder, web developer, what else is there, right? So maybe let's zoom out one step and actually figure out what are the different roles in a startup. Because we get that asked a lot, like, yeah, I want to work for a startup. It's like, okay, where? I was like, well, at the startup. No, but there's actually different positions, right? So if you're looking at it from kind of like a left to right spectrum, it's like we have like the marketing people that are kind of like, you know, they get out the word. This is all like public relations, getting in the press, getting press mentions, getting more people on your Facebook page, right? Getting more leads, meaning email addresses or phone numbers that you can then pass off to the sales team. And what does the sales team do? They talk to the prospects, right? If you're talking about an enterprise kind of company that sells anything to bigger companies, those salespeople then actually call those leads and try to close the sale so revenue actually comes in. And then we have like, so marketing, again, generates those leads, and the salespeople try to convert those leads into actual customers. And then we have kind of like this, in the center a little bit, is what's called product management. Those are the guys, I used to be a product manager, and user experience, and that is actually the people who decide what gets built by the engineering team, by the development team, right? And they base that on what the sales team needs, what the marketing team needs, and most importantly, what the actual users, the actual customer needs. So they spend a lot of time on the phone talking to customers and figuring out what is the most crucial feature or improvement to the product that we're offering that they need. And then they take that and translate it into what we call product specification or feature description or stories that then get communicated to the web development team. And they only worry about the technical implementation, meaning they write code. And then we have the development team, and they build those features, and they want to have not talk to the sales team. They generally don't want to talk to the marketing team. They want to focus on code and they want to have somebody who does all that communication for them. I think that's a typical startup, right?
Yeah, really, so to sort of reiterate what Marco was saying, there's two main like roles of a startup. There's a product side where you're building things out,
exactly.
And then there's the like sales and marketing side where you're like communicating with people, and it's sort of more people driven versus being sort of technology and product driven. So there's pros and cons to sort of both sides of it, but at the end of the day, regardless of what your skill set is, if you can find one of these buckets that you really are passionate about, you can probably find a startup.
Why don't we jump into those buckets a little more? So if you're looking at marketing, right, if you're thinking about, hey, that's kind of what I like being in social media, doing like, copywriting, blog posts, all of that belongs into marketing. Well, then think about it. So how could you demonstrate that skill today, right? So you probably should have a portfolio page or something. If not, create one, right? Build one yourself or use any of the free tools to make a website and add Google Analytics to that. Trying to drive some traffic to your own site, right? Share with your friends. And then look at actually those traffic numbers, even if it's just 10, 15 people, and understand what those metrics mean, right? What's a session? What's a visitor? What's a page view? What's duration and time? What's bounce rate? All those things. Those are things that you need to know, right?
If you're looking to have a job as a marketer, there's really no reason for you not to have a personal blog. And you can blog about just anything that you care about. If you love horse racing, you could have a blog on horse racing, right? If you're passionate about like medicine, do it on medicine. Like whatever you care about, just blog about it and write about it. And you'll be amazed how much people care about the content that you actually have to share.
And that writing is exactly what a core responsibility of the marketing team is as well, is copywriting, writing a blog post, right? Writing the copy that goes on a page that the user comes to, so that user is convinced that they need to leave their email address, which is a lead, and that lead gets then passed on, as I explained previously, to the sales team, right? So writing that copy is really, really hard because you're not able to talk to the user. You need to convince them with like 2 or 3 sentences, and practicing that over and over again by writing with blog posts, for example, or even tweets, right? That's really critical. So that's something like, if you're marketing, you should have an active Twitter feed. I'd say you should be pretty active on maybe have your own Facebook page and have a blog and practice that craft, and then have something that people can look at before they talk to you, more than just your resume.
And then when you go in for the interview, you can talk about your blog.
Exactly.
When somebody says what have you done, you can say, I have this blog, and here's like the types of posts that do really well on my blog, and the reason why is because of this type of audience and stuff like that. The more you understand about that, the better you'll be able to communicate.
So my example would be, right, it's like, for marketing, it's like, I have a travel blog. I don't update it anymore, but I traveled around the world. And so I wrote, I don't know, 30, 40 or something, I don't even know how many travel blog posts. And I played around with it, right? I gave a free ebook away and wanted people's email address. And I played around with the copy. It's like, what if I change the copy a little bit? Does my conversion rate, meaning do more people download my ebook and give me their email address, right? I played around with this, and then by doing it, I actually learned what didn't work and what worked. And that's stuff, if I were to interview for a marketing position, that I would bring up, how I learned that. And it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not, it's that I did it and that I learned those lessons out of it.
So it's really just like, regardless about it, having real world experience, however you want to do it, is super valuable. I think a couple of the other positions that I think are really interesting in these startups are, I think that being like a web developer, somebody who's actually building the product, is really interesting as well. I think tackling sort of these like complicated problems and presenting user with solutions, like that's really wonderful. So that's what I love to do. I love building things. I like seeing something live that I can just point to my friends and say, hey, you see this like a button that got added to sort of our homepage today? I was the guy that did that. And knowing that, like, when I was working at PayPal, like one of the biggest things that draws engineers to a company like PayPal is how many people actually get to see how, like, the stuff that you're doing
like
on a daily.
Immediately.
Yeah,
right?
Basically, like, you make the change, you ship it out, and millions of people are impacted immediately. So talk about like a huge impact that you can have if you're building out these products.
Yep. So you want to talk more about web development?
So I also want to mention designers are pretty interesting too, because anybody can build things, but then making things that are actually really visually appealing is a pretty cool craft too, because that has a lot of it makes you feel good when you build something that's really
So
great.
you could start that today by making, going to looking in your community and seeing which festivals are out there and maybe making a flyer for them, right? Just crank out your Illustrator, your Photoshop, and try to make a good flyer that looks better than some clip art and some PowerPoint slides, right? And see if you can do that. That's a good way of practicing that and see, like, do I like this, right? Because if I were a visual designer at a startup, I need to be top-notch with those things.
Yeah. And you'll find that designers are actually a pretty valuable role in these different startups out there.
Yep. And then we also have sales, right? That is like, you need to sell. If you're a sales guy, you probably kind of know that already, because you like selling things, you like talking to people. You try and tell them like the pros and the cons of a product and why they should have it, and you're really eloquent. I think you can talk a lot. You're also really good maybe of putting together proposals of this is like all the features that a product has. That can be anything from a car to a software product, and that is really enticing. So it's also copywriting in a way, right? And people want to buy it.
I think one of the most important things if you're looking to have a sales position in a startup is that people actually want the startup, because the biggest problem a startup can have is they're solving a problem that doesn't actually exist. Yeah. Nobody cares about it. So being a salesperson where your job is to sell something that people don't want, that's going to be really hard. So I would say the first thing you should do to interview the company if you're looking for the sales position is figure out, is this something that you actually will be able to sell? Because they could be building a product that nobody wants.
Yeah, and then you're going to have a hard time in the sales team, especially since you're going to be like on a commission, right? You get a base salary, and then depending on how many sales you do, you're going to get part of your salary that way. So if it's a tough product to sell, you're going to be hard-pressed to making actually a decent amount of money as your paycheck. What else do we have? We also have a product. I love that. Ken is really passionate about web development. I'm really passionate about web development too, but I also love the product side. And that's basically, what's a product manager? One of the things I always like to tell people is like there's a huge difference between the project manager and a product manager. The project manager makes sure that the train arrives on time and leaves on time, and the schedule is all good and everyone is on the same page, and a product manager builds the train.
Wait, so let's talk about project managers for a little bit. What are the actual responsibilities on a day-to-day basis of a project manager?
A project manager would be like, you need to make sure that you communicate to, they're also called account managers oftentimes at startups, right? It's like you communicate to a client that a startup has, right? If you work in, that could be like if you sold something to a university, for example. You make sure they have everything. If they have any questions, if they don't know how to use your tool, you got to help them out a little bit. Maybe they have some problems getting started. That's account managers. Project managers, when they say like, okay, we're having this new launch, we need to make sure that all the different teams communicate with each other. Everyone sticks to their deadlines, and things are going to be on time. I think in smaller startups, you have less project managers. In bigger startups, when they get to like 50, 60, you may have the first project managers because there's a lot of internal communication going on. Those are project managers. Now, product managers are the guys who I described earlier. They're building the train, and that basically means you're going to talk to your customers, to your users, to the sales team, and figure out what's the core feature, what's the next thing that we're going to build. One of the most important things is like prioritization, right? That is like figuring out what's the one thing we build today, because we can build 1,000 things, right? And one of the key things of a good product manager is to figure out, this is what we're going to build, and I know exactly why, and I know exactly how I'm going to measure if that new feature is going to be successful or not. And then the dev team is going to build it, but then the dev team is going to be super happy if that thing came out well and users love it. And then you know as a product manager, you've done your job well, and the dev team gives you the respect, versus if they build something that no one cares and no one uses, you're kind of in trouble there.
Yeah, I think Marco actually touched on a really interesting point, and it's the fact that as these different startups get to different sizes, sort of the dynamics of it change a lot.
Exactly.
So a company that has 2 employees is going to be much different than a company that has 10 employees, and that's going to be way different than a company that has 50 employees. Basically, if you work on a bigger company, one with maybe like the 20-plus range, the developers really don't want to talk to the sales guy at all. Basically, that's what the product manager's job is to be that middleman, like act as like a buffer, and keep the sales guys away from bothering the developers. Because what will happen is the sales guys will ask for stuff that isn't actually important. And if you have a bunch of sales guys coming in to talk to these developers, you're going to start building out all these random things that aren't thought out. So as companies get bigger, sort of a wall, like an invisible wall, sort of gets placed between the sales staff and the developers on a day-to-day basis. There's still friendship and you can communicate and stuff, but it's not like communicating, this is what you're going to do. In a smaller company, when a salesperson comes up to you, if there's like 4 or 5 people, basically what you'll do is you'll just run it by the product manager and say like, hey, is this okay if I do this guy's thing? And the product manager will probably be like, sure, just make sure you do X, Y, and Z first. And you're just like, okay, and then you just do it. So it's a lot more like free form in the smaller ones, but as you get bigger, there sort of becomes...
The specialization becomes more and more important, right? And that's also when you're looking for landing a job important. If you go for smaller ones, they might hire you because you have 5, 6 skills, none of them like really, really, really specialized, but you know a lot in different areas, so they can use you in a lot of different areas, and then you might pick one that you then start specializing while being on the job. Versus if you go for a bigger startup, they're going to usually hire you for one skill that you're really good at, and then once you're on the job, you actually impress them by knowing a lot of other skills, right? So you might be a developer that all of a sudden knows a lot about blogging and that too, so you might actually talk a lot to the marketing team and give your feedback to what they're doing, right? And then that helps them because they see it from a different perspective. Same goes for product managers, marketing, sales, and so forth. What else do we want to cover? It's like the whole culture stuff, right?
Oh, that's so good. I love this question.
That's what a lot of like, you read these articles, right, on TechCrunch, Mashables, like startup culture, all that stuff. So it's not just all about like, you know, ping pong tables and all of this, even though that's a part of it, and I'm a big believer that team building via ping pong tables is awesome, but it's also like, how do you actually figure out if those people are nice at a startup?
Yeah, so one of the other things that I should point out is it goes both ways. Basically, there's a startup culture, and it may exist and it may not. And it's also pretty common if you do not fit. If you seem like a jerk and you're not going to fit in, you're not going to like play well with others, you're not going to like you might be the best guy at the skill, but if you're not a team player and you're not really in it for the right reasons, they're going to not hire you because they don't care how good you are, because like the team itself is way more important than the skills.
Yep, definitely agree. So what do you do if you want to figure out like, you know, how is that startup? Do I like those? Is this a good fit for me? Because, you know, working for a big company, you're working for a smaller team, and you really want to make sure that you fit in there, and that team dynamics is really important. So the first thing I usually tell people when they ask me is like, hey, meet with everyone. Like, you know, just meet with a few people of the team and just have coffee with them. Do you like hanging out with them? You're going to spend a lot of time with them, right? In a traditional job, you never get to hang out with anyone. You just get hired, and then you get put in your office or your cubicle or your desk, and you're like, hey, and then you meet everyone. At a startup, I usually try to meet people before I even consider applying for that job.
Yeah, you want to make sure, like a lot of times people will interview you with like the hiring manager, and you want to make sure to meet the people on the team too, and make sure that you like gel with all the members of the team as well as like the management. Because if the team is a bunch of people that you don't really feel like you could become a part of their team, you're not going to have a good time, and it's going to be an awful experience for both of you. So make sure to meet some of the members on the team, hopefully all of the members. So back when we were interviewing people at Where.com and PayPal, the interview process was basically the hiring manager would do the initial sort of like sit-down interview, and then each of the developers on the team would come in pairs and have like a little bit of a general interview. Tell me about your past. What are you passionate about? This, that, the other thing. And then also solving technical problems on the whiteboard.
Yeah, and so that's what we did too. Like, I would talk, when I interviewed, I would talk to the VP of sales, marketing director. I would talk to people on the dev team. I talked to the CEO as well, and I talked to the also people directly I would work with. And then you can figure out, like, you can ask questions like, how do you disagree with my boss? You know, if they're like 2 director roles or 2 VP roles, and then you can just really easily read in people's faces, like, that's just normal. We do that every day, like bang heads and figure it out, because we're on the same team, and all we care about is that what we're building, what we believe in, the vision of the startup, that's successful. And you can just tell that by asking that questions to different people. You ask it to 5 different people, and they're all going to come back with like a weird answer. You're like, okay, something's off here, and then, you know, it's probably not the best place to go because something's off there, and you'll notice that as soon as you work there. Okay, like there's some stuff going on, and people talking behind each other's back. Versus a real team, like you described, right? It's going to be like that's one unit, and they're all going to stick up for each other and help each other out, and that's the place where you really want to be.
Yeah, the teams that I've been on the startups I've worked for have just been some of the best teams that I've ever sort of been on. Like whether it's like a basketball team or like any sort of like collection of people, the teams that I've worked at the startup, there's a huge relationship. Because you're sort of in the trenches together. It's almost like it's probably like way watered down, but it's like in the army, right? You're fighting with these people side by side. You guys are sort of going to metaphorical battle every single day, trying to sort of take over the world and trying to just make your company successful. So I think that's the team aspect of it is one of the coolest things about the startup culture.
So we got a few questions. I want to go through the last question that we have here, and then we started. There's a few technical questions. Happy to answer them, so hang in there with us. A bunch of Ruby and so like jumping ship and all that stuff. Definitely want to get to that. But we also said like, you know, when we're looking at startups versus corporate, right? The bigger companies, anything that has like 100, 200 plus, right? Big tech companies could be just as well. It's like, what's the good? What's the bad? Like, what are differences? And then so let's look. I like to look at the positive side of everything.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at you know, the startup pros, what do you think is one of the biggest things?
I think the coolest thing is just the fact that like the reason that you wake up every morning is not a paycheck. It's to change the world in some way. Like if you're going to be successful, you got to like drink the Kool-Aid and you got to believe in the vision of the company.
And to me that means like the responsibility that you have, right? It's like to believe in that vision and then build something that matters ultimately.
Yeah, startups are all about like trust, and you trust your team members, and with that trust, you get additional responsibilities. So as somebody who's just starting out at a company, they will believe in you until you prove that you just don't belong with that sort of responsibility, as opposed to the big company, which is sort of more the opposite. You have to prove yourself first to get the responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. You get the responsibility really quick, and that's also the learning, right? At a startup, you're going to learn at an accelerated pace because there's just so much to do, right? And oftentimes it's going to be like, I don't know how to do this. Well, then just learn it and figure it out. You have a couple of days, right? And that's great because that's a lot of responsibility as well. And then you get to accelerate, and that's all the skills, all the knowledge that you can learn on the job, which prepares you for more on that same job or for the next startup. Either way, it works.
Yeah, the learning is just one of the most important things you can get.
And then one of the things that I also really like is at a startup, because it moves a lot faster, you get a lot of feedback, right? From either users, from the other team members, because you're so close. And through feedback, that's how I like to improve. I love feedback and love hearing what did I do good today, what did I do bad today, how can I improve? And on a startup, you get this, especially on the technical side, you get that. Multiple times a day you get feedback on your code.
Yeah, you have to develop a little bit of a thick skin and be okay with people criticizing you. But because of that, you end up getting to improve at just this like really, really rapid pace.
Now, what about the startup maybe cons or the corporate pros? And I see a lot of questions coming in. We get to them in a moment. We're always like looking a little to the right because we really want to make sure we answer your question. But we still have a few minutes left. So, one of the things you need to ask when you go to a startup in an interview, right? If you think about, okay, this is a good team, this is a good fit, you really like this, and you probably have a shot of getting the job. It's like you need to figure out like how much money do they have in the bank, right? So one of the questions I like to ask is like, how long is your runway? What's your burn rate? Basically, when are you running out of cash? How long can you guarantee me a paycheck? If you're looking at corporate, right, that's not really the question. It's not like Microsoft or Google are going to run out of.
But these companies do have layoffs too,
that's
right?
True. That's true. You can have that too. But if you're looking at a startup, I'd say
the risk is way higher.
The risk is way higher. But if you get like about maybe a year-long runway, you're like, okay, for a year we have enough money in the bank. And then you ask, what's your strategy after? They're like, oh, we're going to either be more profitable or we're going to raise another round, and this is our strategy to get there.
Like one other thing we can mention is sort of like the differences in the types of people that typically work in the corporate versus the startup world. Startup world moves a lot faster, so people who work in these corporate jobs tend to work there for many, many years and like slowly climb up the ladder. Meanwhile, these startup jobs, a lot of people are there for like 2 or 3 years, and then they're like, okay, it's time for me to jump ship, like something mentioned. And you sort of just move on to sort of the next more exciting thing.
One other thing that draws me to startups is like the intensity, right? So if you work you might not necessarily work longer hours at a startup, even though a lot of people want you to believe that.
Sometimes you will, though.
But you also do that at a bigger company,
true.
right? So on the Friday night, you got to stay late at a big company or at a startup sometimes because there's a project deadline or you really want to get something out there. But one thing that is like the work hour is more intense at a startup because you need to figure out new things. It's not the same over and over again. You need to learn new things. So it will feel more intense.
Absolutely.
And I love that because it's like basically it's if you say you go home at 6 p.m. around that time every day, right? And it's 5. At a startup, you ask yourself, I have 1 more hour. What can I do in that 1 hour to help my team, right? Or you stayed later because you know that tomorrow morning Ken is going to look at something that you built and you want to make sure it's perfect. Otherwise, he's blocked and then he wastes time.
So the coolest thing at the first startup that I worked at was all the metrics were totally public. So basically, there were these big, they called them knock walls, which are just like these like display monitors that gave all the metrics of anything we cared about. They're displaying things called KPIs or key performance indicators.
Yep.
And being able to every day spend 10 or 15 minutes looking at the numbers and looking at the graphs and being able to say, oh, this spike is because of this improvement that I did over here, or you see this over here. And when you actually see that feedback, like visually of like here's how users are interacting with our project differently, I think it's really easy to get sucked into working more hours because it's a lot more fun. You know that you have the impact as opposed to how much of a change are you making to a big company by changing this headline? Like, who knows? But with a startup, you can look at the numbers and be like, oh, that was all me. That this is the point where I deployed my
We just got 500 new users, or the customer service department got 20% less hours because we built a new feature and now the users actually understand which button they have to click, right?
Exactly.
So that is something that's there. We're running like the last 10 minutes. We quickly want to talk about our virtual coding apprenticeship and then answer a few questions. So hang in there with us, right?
Cool. Yeah.
So basically, in a nutshell, our virtual coding apprenticeship, as I mentioned before, is taking people who have very few coding experience. Some have a little bit, but you can come with pretty much no prerequisites, and then bring them to a point where we treat them throughout the 12-week apprenticeship as junior web developers. And they're going to launch and build their own ideas. So that's perfect for entrepreneurs who don't have a tech team and actually want to learn how to code. Because we believe if you know how to code, you're just so much better off than everyone else who outsources it for a million reasons. But the most of them is the speed and the time it takes you to build new features and react to user feedback. That usually separates a successful startup from one that's not successful. Is how fast can you actually improve and build new features that the users actually care about.
Yeah, we also have people who are looking to change careers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So some people don't really want to launch their own startup, but they actually want to just be able to work at a different startup. So we have people that are going through the program for that as well.
And so we adjusted a little bit. So the program comes with like you build a couple of web applications with us, like a Yelp clone, Netflix clone, right? You get familiar with all the same tools that professional web developers are using. And then if we ask you in the very beginning, you get a coding mentor and you get technical office hours, everything on a weekly basis. And the coding mentor would ask you, what's your goal? And if you want to launch your startup, your own idea, we're going to adjust it so it's really entrepreneurial driven and it gets you something launched really fast. But then again, if you're looking for a job, right, we make sure you get the knowledge that you need to be impactful and you can ace that interview.
Yeah, it's all about like your personal sort of situation. You have access to like our email addresses, our mentors' email addresses. You can ask us any questions that you want, as well as we'll tailor like the things to be exactly what you need to do to achieve your goals.
One thing I really like the best is like no one really believes me that, but when they come into the program and they understand, it's like our Q&A forum, right? It's if you get stuck with coding and go and building your first application and you don't know what to do anymore, there's a place where you can, take your error message, post it there, and usually within an hour we help you. One of our mentors comes and says, hey, you're missing a comma on line 5, And then you can focus on learning more and improving your skills rather than spinning in circles and trying to fix their message.
Yeah, and the other thing we should point out is what we're doing now is sort of what works in startups, right? So startups will hire junior engineers, and then they pair them up with a mentor and sort of teach them through that mechanism too. So pairing you up with a mentor is just sort of how things work in the startup world.
Exactly, and so you get that before you actually at a startup. You get that real world experience. So that's the virtual apprenticeship, 12 weeks. You can do it part-time, 15 hours, 10 to 15 hours.
Some people are doing it full-time.
Some people doing it full-time, so whatever works for you, we're really flexible there. That's something, we sent more information about that out. You can go to thefirehoseproject.com and check it out there too. We have the curriculum and everything up. But I want to get to some questions before I run out of time. So let's pull this close here a little bit and start from, what do we have? Let's see. How valuable, Hugo asked a really cool question, how valuable is it to be multidisciplinary when you want to be hired for a startup, right? So I think that depends. As I said earlier, is if you have one skill that you're really good at, that's what you're usually going to get hired for, right? I'm really good with coding. I'm really good with user experience. I'm really good with like account management, right? I held accounts before. I'm really good with marketing because I have my own blog and I learned all these things. That's what you get in the door with, and then you have your job and you get your seat on the table. But then you can really be a superstar within the startup if you have all these other skills. I think at Stanford they teach that, right? You want to be a T student. You want to be really deep in one discipline, but then you want to be broad in a lot of other disciplines. So I think that's my best answer. Is like, how valuable is it if you have a lot of skills, being multidisciplinary?
Yeah, exactly. So you want to have one really solid core competency as well as being really great at sort of the interdisciplinary stuff.
So Ashok also asked a great question. How long does it take to learn to be a great developer? I think.
Well, the first thing is you're always learning, and if you, I feel like if you say great developer, like if you ask any developer that like you respect, are you a great one? They're like, I'm pretty good, but like I could be better, and I know these are the areas to improve on.
And even if you ask people who like, you know, develop frameworks or do something really amazing or build Twitter and scale it up, right? They're gonna be like, there's still a lot. I wrote the book on it, but there's still so much to learn. It's an ever-changing field.
Yeah, and really what it comes down to is the more that you know about this stuff and the better a developer you become, you realize there's this whole tier above you at every single stage of the game. So being a great developer, I think the more important thing is how can you just be effective at building stuff? That's, I think, the more important thing, and I think that's an interesting thing too, because you can learn how to be an effective programmer pretty quickly.
I think, yeah, and if we're talking about how much do you need to put into to be at a level for a startup, for a junior web developer, I'd say anything, it depends. You know, what you need is like a few different things. You need a clear path of learning. You need to have I think you need to have a coding mentor that's just accelerating your learning.
Well, just like a support system. So if you have like a friend who codes who you can ask them questions to, or a coding mentor, or just some support system so you don't get stuck.
Yep. And then, so I call it coding mentor, you call it support system. Both work. That's what you need. And then build real-world web applications. You know, going into Code Academy and doing in-browser stuff and playing games, that's cool. But you need to launch real stuff, and you need to use the same tools as the pro out there. You need to use GitHub, and you need to use, if you go Ruby on Rails, you need to use the real Ruby on Rails, right? And use that framework and know it inside out. And that's exactly what you did. If you come to technical interview, you can demonstrate that you have those skills, and you probably get the technical interview because you actually have real stuff out there, and there's code that people can check before they even in person. Let's go further. There's like any tips on salary versus equity when joining a startup. So first, what's equity, right? Salary, everyone knows. That's the paycheck you get every 2 weeks, every month. Equity. Startups give you equity. They give you a tiny sliver of the company, right? And then if the company either goes public, meaning goes IPO, you can buy stocks. Everyone can buy them.
On like the public market, so like the NASDAQ or something like that.
On Wall Street. Then you could sell your shares and make money that way, right? That's usually a long time off, and not too many startups IPO. But then you can also, it could be acquired, right? You could get one big paycheck. I always say like the equity, that's important, but you need to have enough salary to pay all your bills and live a reasonable, comfortable or life.
Yeah, really what you're looking at is the equity is like this like pretty big scratch ticket, which could work out or it could not. So you really, if you believe in the vision, you want to have at least enough so you have a little bit of skin in the game where you're really just, if it's successful, you have this like pretty big win. But at the same time, you should never make a decision based solely on equity.
No, never, because you don't know if it works out. Also, got to mention like there's what's called a vesting cycle.
Oh yeah.
It's like you get the equity, but only after 4 years of working at the company, you actually have 100%, you own 100% of that equity. So if you leave after a year, you usually only have 25%, and then like after 2 years, you have a little more. So there's a cliff. If you leave after 8 months, you get none of the equity, right? And that's to protect the startup, so they don't have people who just come for 2 months and they go with all this equity, and then all of a sudden there's nothing left for additional investors.
One of the flip sides is if a company is very successful, before your equity vests, you probably won't get it. So if basically it takes a year for your equity to actually become yours, and they sell 6 months into it, you actually won't get. You'll probably get like a bonus or something. They'll treat you nice because it's really unfortunate what happened. But at the end of the day, your stock wasn't yours when sort of the transaction happened.
Sometimes there's rules, right?
Yeah, it's all kind of like the paperwork is complicated.
But I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's all about like you get some equity, you know that. If the startup ever gets acquired, you know you're going to get some money in the bank. You know, you're not going to make, if you're an employee, like you're not going to make 200 million or some crazy stuff. If you get a nice, really big paycheck, maybe even bigger, that's great, but that's Ken said, that's a big scratch.
Yeah, it's really not enough to change your life, but it's enough to maybe pay off your credit card bills. That's kind of what you're going to look at.
That's a really good analogy. Yeah, I like that. So there's another question is like, Neil asked that, I really like that, is like, should I push myself straight as a product manager, or should I spend time actually learning how to code? And that's a really good question, right, to become part of the technical team. And I think a lot of product managers actually know how to code, and they know how to how technical product is built actually from the inside as well. And that makes them better product managers because they not only understand how to talk to all the non-technical people in the startup, but they also know how they could build it themselves, or they can communicate because of that knowledge really well with the dev team. And they appreciate how much the craft of building a product, of building software.
Now, one of my close friends is working in a startup now. He was an iPhone dev, and he decided he wanted to stop doing development and do product management instead. So now he is able to leverage all the skills he has as an iPhone developer while doing product management as well.
And if you look at the big companies like Google and Apple,
they
only hire technical people for product, and Facebook too, for product manager roles.
Like they have a technical interview, I think.
Yeah, exactly. They run you through the same interview that they would run a junior web developer through to become a product manager who's never going to write code, because they know if you understand those things, you can solve those problems. Theoretically, you're going to be so much more effective talking to the web dev team and understanding their challenges, and then also communicating back to the company, and that results in faster turnovers for new features, and then ultimately speed is what really matters to companies. So I'd say learn how to code and build some products first, and that also gives you the experience like, oh, there's all the different moving pieces that I need to understand when building something, and then you have a much better shot and you be a much better product manager if you decide to move into that position. Plus, then again, if you're thinking about the T student, right? Now you could be really good in development, and you could come in as a developer, but then actually take over product management roles, and then you all of a sudden be everywhere, and then you're going to have a really big impact as an employee for a startup.
Absolutely.
What else do we have? We're already 2 minutes over. God. Last question. What's more valuable to know, JavaScript or Python? Okay, all these technical questions. How can I switch a website over from PHP to Ruby? How difficult is it?
Oh, maybe I'll take that one. So,
go for it.
So, is it possible to switch a website written in PHP to Ruby? How difficult is it? So that's the question, and it's less about what the question actually is, but I think it's more about sort of the startup mentality. And at the end of the day, if you're building something with a lot of unknowns, there's probably going to be a time where it's actually easier to just rewrite it from scratch as opposed to sort of add additional features. So it's not that uncommon every couple of years for a startup to just ditch everything that it has and build it from scratch. So it's basically it's going to be a lot faster because you understand exactly what you need to build the second time around. From like the technical thing, it's going to still be hard because you have to build all the features and you have to do all the things. But startups are probably going to be in a situation where they need to do that anyway at some point.
So yeah, I think we're pretty much done. We're a few minutes over, but yeah, this was awesome.
So if anybody has any questions, maybe feel free to reply to the emails we're sending out. We're happy to sort of answer those individually to you guys.
Yeah, and we're going to send an email out with the link to this. It's going to be recorded, and so other people can watch it too. And we're also going to share the links to our virtual apprenticeship if you guys are fired up about learning how to code, which we like, love teaching people who are really fired up. And then also, yeah, we answer a few more questions, give you some resources about what we talked about, all the links where you can find startups that are hiring right now, maybe the VCs to follow on Twitter, and yeah, then you're ready, and you can do that tonight. You can start already researching some companies and look which one you like, and ask the right questions when you're at the table with those people. Think about runway, think about equity, salary. Get to know the people, ask them how to disagree with each other. Those are, I think, the key things, right? And network. Go out to networking events and yeah, let us know if you have any other questions. My email, you're gonna have it already. Marco@thefirehostproject.com.
I'm Ken at the Firehose Project.
It's pretty simple. Our name's Marco Ken at the URL, and then yeah.
Yeah, and if you guys get it, if we helped you get a job, send us an email too, because we'd be super happy.
They'd be super stoked. Yeah, we'd be super happy if that happens after our webinar here. Okay, guys, hang in there, and we'll talk to you soon.